Singaporean is competing in the same job scope as a foreigner, he'll always get the job first. Now this has two implications. Firstly, this debate is only about situations where both the Singaporean and his foreign counterpart have already met the minimum qualification for the line of work. And secondly, this debate doesn't take place in industries where there's a shortage of labour, such as the medical profession. In cases where we're already struggling to hire Singaporeans, we'll be happy for foreigners to take those jobs. So working on this assumption of motion, our policy is as follows. As a default rule, all firms shouldn't hire foreigners. This means that they must search for local employees first. Should a firm be unable to find a suitable Singaporean for a given profession, they will then have to apply for a work visa for a foreigner. In the process, firms will have to supply data and substantive reasons as to why they were unable to find a Singaporean employee in the first place. This is standard procedure for immigration authorities. If the government's assessments suggest that certain sectors have chronic labour shortages, then the government may consider loosening the visa regulations for these particular industries. This policy has a track record of success in countries like Australia, whose unemployment rate has been relatively stable in recent times, as compared to nations with laxer policies like New Zealand and the USA. Proposition will thus show you that governments owe a duty to ensure that Singaporean jobs go to Singaporean people with three main arguments. Firstly, because this policy protects Singaporean livelihoods. Secondly, because Singaporeans need to overcome systematic disadvantages. And thirdly, because this policy creates a more stable economy. So let's first look at our argument about Singaporean livelihoods. The starting premise is that governments owe a generic duty towards the welfare of their citizens for two reasons. Firstly, Singaporeans make unique sacrifices to ensure that their country is prosperous and secure and deserve to reap the benefits. For instance, the state demands that our income be heavily taxed. The state also demands that every Singaporean man gives up the best years of his life to the military. These are just a few examples of what we sacrifice to protect our nation. Singaporeans deserve a guarantee of care in return. I'll take you in a moment, sir. Second, governments actively promise to care for the well-being of Singaporeans. From housing to income equality, our governments are voted in on the basis that they provide the best regime of care for Singapore. But before I move on, go.
When it comes to such things, it's about the opportunity given to the Singaporean citizen. But we think when it comes to such things, and there's such fragile things as economic gain, that Singaporeans should be following meritocracy.
Ma'am, firstly, we think that is not true. It's an assertion that Singaporeans can't follow meritocracy as long as we give priority to them. And secondly, even if we have meritocracy and this results in economic growth, we think that it doesn't matter as long as it doesn't go back to Singaporeans, because this doesn't fulfill the purpose of the economy as the foundation upon which real lives are improved. So moving back to our substantive material. Indeed, all public officials swear an oath that they owe a duty to protect the well-being of their fellow countrymen. We intend to hold them to these promises. Hence, governments owe a duty to the people's welfare because of the promises that they make and the sacrifices that their citizens make. This duty extends to the protection of a citizen's right to employment. This is because employment is central to the average Singaporean's life. Unemployed people cannot send their children to school and pay for their parents' medical bills. A government that asks of its citizens to spill blood for their country's prosperity just cannot turn this right into the hands of a foreigner. Indeed, proposition believes that protecting a Singaporean's right to employment lies at the core of economic development. This is because true economic development isn't just about meritocracy, isn't just about GDP growth. If none of this foreign-driven growth goes back to our Singaporeans, then our economy hasn't served its core purpose to be the foundation for which real lives are improved. And because governments owe a duty towards citizen welfare, and employment is key to that, our policy is definitely justified. Thus, proposition will forward a second substantive argument to deepen this notion of government duties. The thesis of this argument is that Singaporeans are systematically disadvantaged by their citizenship. Let's start by looking at two ways that this is true. Firstly, the government imposes a reservist requirement on all Singaporean men. This means that at the peak of their office work year, men may be forced into a 2-week absence. Secondly, Singaporeans have to demand naturally higher wages. This is because locals live in Singapore, meaning that they must purchase a home, pay school fees, and care for a child. Contrast this with a Thai national temporarily working in Singapore. He only pays rent, and because his family is back at home, the money he remits to cover their cost of living is much lower. Thus, the Thai national demands a much more competitive wage than the Singaporean. According to the Singapore Statistics Division, the average foreign worker in a mid-tier management position earns $2,000 less than a Singaporean counterpart. In other words, Singaporean citizenship carries with it systematic disadvantages. Governments must redress this imbalance by extending Singaporeans the protection of priority. Every one of the 400,000 unemployed Singaporeans who loses a job to a foreigner is one more Singaporean that our government has let down. Proposition demands a stop.